Dr. Jayagopal.
Yes,
He's a good. He loves you a lot.
And
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Emeritus Dr. Hart
Very nice.
for his Berkeley chair and also for Tamil Semory. Without him, we would have not had it. Thank you, Dr. Hart.
well, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hart.
அருமை தமிழ் நெஞ்சங்களே, உலகெங்கும் வாழும் தமிழர்களே, உங்கள் அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். இன்று பேராசிரியர் ஜார்ஜ் ஹார்ட் அவர்களை புளோரிடா அமெரிக்காவிலே சந்தித்து பேசுவதில் மிக்க மகிழ்ச்சி அடைகின்றோம். பெர்க்லி பல்கலைக்கழகத்தில் தமிழ் துறையில் பல்லாண்டு காலம் சிறப்பாக பணிபுரிந்து நமது செம்மொழி சிறப்பாக அமைவதற்கு உதவி செய்த ஜார்ஜ் ஹார்ட் அவர்களுக்கு உலக தமிழர்களின் சார்பிலே நன்றியையும் வாழ்த்துக்களையும் தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கின்றேன். Professor George, I got a few questions for you. The first question, in Tamil literature, what do you like the best?
Well, you know, Tamil literature is obviously a very huge body of literature. It's got many different things. But what sets Tamil apart from all the other Indian languages and from almost all the languages in the world is the great corpus that comes at its beginning about 2,000 years ago, what we call Sangam literature. And Sangam literature is an amazing collection of, covers every aspect of human life. People know the Tirukkural, and that, of course, Tirukkural is a great work. But other works in Sangam literature are also very, very amazing. They're incredible. I translated the whole of the Akananuru, and I've read, you know, other anthologies, and we also translated Purananuru. And what you see in those books is a vision of what life was in the Tamil area in those days. Now, this is something which we simply do not have in any other area of South Asia. If you go to the West, Greek and Latin give us a fairly good idea of how people lived. But Sangam literature is even more basic. It shows everyday life, how people interrelated, how they related to each other, what they did each day, what they believed, how they cooked, how they built houses. It's everything is there from 2,000 years ago. But even more important, it is in Purananuru, we see the ordinary life of everyday people, and also we see a lot about human suffering. And some of that also we see in the other anthologies. This is not so much there in Sanskrit or even other Indian languages, because all the Indian languages really, except for Tamil, developed from Sanskrit in some way or another. Telugu, for example, while it's not related to Sanskrit, all of its early literature was imitative of Sanskrit. So Sangam literature that way is very special. But when we look at it from a world perspective, we see that it has the elements of, how can I put it, of what should be or what needs to be in a literature to make it truly great and truly universal. And this means it talks about real people. It doesn't just talk about gods or sages or, you know, various mythological themes. So the people in Sangam literature are very real in how they interact, what they do, how they suffer. This, and it also brings to the human condition a sort of moral compass, which is very important. For example, there's a remarkable poem in the Agananur. I don't know what number it is. It's by a woman whose husband has gone off to be with courtesans. As most people as people who know the literature know, this is Maradam theme, that you have courtesans and the man goes and visits them, leaving his wife and his kids at home. And in this poem, the woman laments about how hard her life is because she has to put up with this terrible man who's running around with these women. And that kind of thing it's quite remarkable because it brings the feelings and the suffering of this woman into very clear detail, and you really understand what she goes through. Now, of course, when we get to Tirukkural, which is probably maybe a bit later, the author tells us that we should avoid going to courtesans, which is obviously good advice, but that was part of the culture in those days. And here the literature is looking at it and is showing how terrible a thing it is. This kind of thing is all through Sangam literature. It shows how people suffer in poverty, and it also shows great nobility in people. So Sangam literature is really a universal literature that sums up the whole of Tamil culture and life in those days. The other greatest work in Tamil literature, in my opinion, is the Kambaramayanam. And Kamban, it's a religious work, and yet it transcends religion. Kambaramayanam, when Kamban describes how people interact, how they talk, what they do, it's amazing. It's like Dante's Divine Comedy, or the Aeneid, the greatest works of Western literature, or the Odyssey, in that it also sums up Tamil culture, but it does so at a much later time, at least 1,000 years later. And that's good, but it sums it up from, yes, a religious perspective, but if you actually read it, the religion of Kamban is not, it's a very profound religion. And he talks about, as in the, Advaita Vedanta. And Kamban has many of those things in his work. But the characters, for example, Ravana in Kamban is a great, great character. He's actually a far more interesting character than Rama himself, which mirrors Milton's work, because in Milton, Satan is much more interesting than God, because you can make him into a real person. And when you read about Ravana, you're just amazed at his insight. Ravana is like a gangster in the 20s in the U.S. He's like a Cosa Nostra figure or something, but he really comes to life, and he's a fascinating character. And this is what Kamban does. He doesn't just say, if you read Valmiki is very shallow in terms of characterization of people. They're good, they're bad, that's about it. But not in Kamban. Kamban people are fully developed. And of course, there's his beautiful language and how he's able to describe things. All of those things are in Kamban. So you can't really, if you want to really appreciate Tamil, you have to look at least those two things. And then, of course, there's much else in Tamil that we can talk about.
Thank you very much, George. I don't know whether you remember, we took you to the Tamil school in Chicago.
Yes.
And I asked you a question, what is the best Tirukkural in your mind? Manattukkan Masilan Adal Anaitharan Ahula Neera Pira.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. How do we get Tirukkural?
Can you translate that?
How do we get Tirukkural into the youth born and grown up here?
All right. So this is challenging. Do you find that kids tend to be interested in Tirukkural?
My wife, Dr. Saroja Ilangovan, she wrote short stories in Tirukkural in English
Yes.
with some pictures, and that related somehow to the kids. Each Tirukkural, she wrote about 49 Tirukkurals and 49 stories. Is that a way to do it, or what is the best way to get the kids interested in reading Tirukkural?
Well, first of all, I think I think it's maybe a mistake to concentrate only on Tirukkural. Maybe it would be good to bring in some of the Purananuru poems. But how do you get kids interested? You know, this is difficult. Certainly some of the great poems in Purananuru, which nobody really pays much attention to. In many ways, Purananuru is a greater work than Tirukkural.
To get the kids more interested.
Well, they might. This would have to be an experiment.
Okay.
You know, this Yadu Muri, you know, that unfortunately has gotten sort of robbed of its meaning because you have to really look at the whole poem.
Whole poem, yeah.
But if you look at some of the great ethical poems in Purananuru, if you look at the Pari story, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, see, what you need is, and this is what the stories that Saroja has written does, you have to somehow humanize the Tirukkural. You have to bring the human dimension of it out. So it's not just, you know, a bunch of words and...
It's not a poem, but it's a way to live life.
Yeah, and you know, it's challenging to get kids to know it. The good thing about Tirukkural is that the poems are so short they can memorize them.
A lot of kids are memorizing and saying, but I don't know how much they understand.
Well, it's not easy to understand, but maybe one of the things you can do in some of these classes is to take 3 Kurals or 4 Kurals and explain how they work and what they say.
Good.
But I know one thing I've found is that all Indians respond to Tirukkural. They don't have to be Tamils. They all respond to it in a very positive way. Westerners a little less so because the culture doesn't have it has a moral dimension, but it's a bit different than what it is in India. But still, I think you can do that. I think you see, the thing is maybe the hook is, you know, look, this is really interesting. It's a very rich language. You understand what's going on in this poem, and it opens you up to so many things.
Thank you very much. I have great respect for Professor A.K. Ramanujan, who really translated and brought it out what is in Tamil, what is the best in Tamil.
Yeah.
You know him well. What do you think Ramanujan did, and how it can be progressed further than what you have done all your life teaching Tamil in the academic area. What do you think the future will hold for young people to go into universities in their level, your level? Is there a possibility, or what do you think?
Which is the status of Tamil studies in India. And when you look at the way Tamil is taught in India, what we find is
India or US?
in India.
Okay.
That's because India's, you have to start with India.
Yeah.
And the problem with Tamil in India is that people have not learned, the Tamil scholars have not learned other languages.
Yes.
First of all, they need to know English so that they can, because in English there's available an enormous body of literature and study on how you can approach things and different ways to approach the text. That's the first thing. But they also need to learn other Indian languages. There has been enormous contact and influence back and forth between Telugu and Tamil. People who learns Telugu, they should all learn Telugu. They should learn Kannada, Malayalam, even Hindi. And of course, they won't learn Sanskrit because Sanskrit is somehow thought of as a religious language. But Sanskrit is not just a religious language. It was a lingua franca for half the world for 1,000 years. And it was the language in which people did trade and they did all sorts of things. And so knowing Sanskrit is important. And so then what you begin to get is you get a different perspective on Tamil, which shows you its true place in the world. And this is important. Now, how does that affect what goes on here? Ideally, what needs to go on is there should be interchange between India and here. There should be people in this country who teach Tamil, which there are, and they should interact with their colleagues in India, which they do to some extent. But but Tamil studies it's a very small area in this country. There are only a handful of people who do it. What Ramanujan did is Ramanujan, you have to understand, first of all, he was a Shakespeare scholar. Second of all, he was a Kannada poet. Third, he was an English poet. And then he came to Tamil. And when he read some Sangam literature, he was simply awestruck and amazed that in India there is such a literature and nobody knew about it. And so he translated it into English, at least some of it, some poems. First translations we actually have from either Sanskrit or Tamil, which are in how can I put it, a passable English poetic language. All the rest were in kind of Victorian English, which is horrible. And so suddenly people became aware that there's this amazing literature in Tamil. I actually remember when I was learning Tamil, I sat down with him one-on-one, and we started reading the Purananuru together. And we went through a couple poems, and then we got to the poem, I don't know, right at the beginning somewhere. What's it do? It compares the king to the sun, and it says, look, the sun is just nothing, but the king is much greater than the sun. And it's a great poem. And suddenly Raman's eyes lit up, and she said, now, look at this. And he was just transported by this poem. what Raman did then was make people aware of this great literature in Tamil. What we've been able to do since then is to, have students who go out and work on Tamil. One of our students, Archana Venkatesan, recently translated Nammarvar. Now, Nammarvar is actually quite an amazing poet. And she translated it in such a way that, and how she did it, I don't know, because it's very tough to do this, that it came across in English. And it was written up in the New York Review of Books, which is, and also she got several prizes for it in this country. So this broadens people's awareness of Tamil. So that's the question. How do we make people aware of Tamil in this country? And one of the ways you do it is to get people like Archana and another of our students, Srini Reddy, who has just written a comprehensive book for learning about ancient India and South Asia with translations. For the first time, anybody's put Tamil along with Sanskrit, Prakrit, Pali, and Tamil. And Srini got so excited. Srini knows Tamil. He's also translated from Telugu. And he's a very good translator. And he's put all sorts of Tamil works in there. So people who are reading about what ancient India was suddenly encounter these old poems, Sangam literature and Silappathiyaram. He likes Silappathiyaram especially.
Yeah, I know Srini Reddy. Yeah, he loves you.
Srini Reddy?
Yeah, he loves you a lot. Yeah.
Well, Srini Reddy is a remarkable guy. But anyway, he did this work. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's
Yes,
the first time anybody has ever put Tamil and Sanskrit together. I mean, what's going on, The Sanskrit people, they're stuck in Sanskrit. They think it never got influenced by anything else. Nothing ever happened to Sanskrit except Sanskrit. They're just stupid.
Thank you, George.
I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, Ramanujam and you have done the enormous work in bringing Tamil in the United States, in the academic world, and students are really encouraged by you people, and I hope it takes up in the future. We really appreciate you, and on behalf of all the Tamils in the world, I really thank you. You and Kausalya enjoy a happy, long life. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Yalangu.
Thank you.
தமிழுக்கும் அமுதென்று பேர் அந்த தமிழ் இன்பத் தமிழ் எங்கள் உயிருக்கு நேர் உயிருக்கு நேர் தமிழுக்கு நிலவென்று பேர் இன்பத் தமிழ் எங்கள் சமூகத்தின் விளைவுக்கு நீர் தமிழுக்கு மனம் என்று பேர் இன்பத் தமிழ் எங்கள் வாழ்வுக்கு நிருமித்தவோர் தமிழுக்கு மதுவென்று பேர் தமிழுக்கு மதுவென்று பேர் இன்பத் தமிழ் எங்கள் உரிமைக்கும் பயிருக்கு வேர் பயிருக்கு வேர் தமிழுக்கும் அமுதென்று பேர் அந்த தமிழ் இன்பத்